Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks just continue to roll in the 2024 season. Want to dive into what makes this Oregon team special and, quite frankly, what makes them the best team that we've seen in the country up until this point in 2024. I got 5 talking points. Now I'm going to try to stick to those talking points. The Oregon fans who've been rocking with the boys for a while, y'all know that I tend to ramble when I talk about this program. So I'm going to try to keep it short, concise, and sweet. That being said, I only have 5 talking points. There's probably 10 to 15 that we could have included. So if you think there's something that I'm missing that should be in this conversation, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Many of y'all know it. It's been a blast for me to talk this program on the recruiting trail in the offseason and now in 2024. The amount of support y'all continue to show, it's amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with a broad conversation when you go and evaluate some of the best teams in all of college football. I think it starts with top-end star talent, which Oregon certainly has. When you talk about guys like Dylan Gabriel and Jordan James and Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Derek Harmon on the defensive side of the football, Jabbar Muhammad, the elite star talent is there. And every single national championship caliber team we've seen over the last decade in college football, they have that. But what I think makes Oregon special from some of the other teams that we see across the country, the teams like Georgia, the teams like Ohio State, is that Oregon doesn't really have many holes. Now, they have some things that we've talked about and say we want to see them continue to work on. But in terms of like blatant, obvious weaknesses within this Oregon team, there just ain't that many. You look at Georgia and say Carson Beck has been extremely shaky. That offense has been shaky for Georgia. You look at Ohio State, massive question marks on the offensive line. For all these other really, really good teams in college football, they have some of that star talent. They have guys that will be top 10, top 15 NFL draft picks. But every other team in the country, you can kind of poke holes in terms of their team and their depth chart. You look at Oregon, and again, there are things we want to see Oregon continue to get better at. But from a blatant hole or weakness within this Oregon team, there just ain't one. And when you combine that with elite star talent, a guy like Dylan Gabriel, who's top 3 in Heisman voting odds, and then you look at how complete this team is, that's kind of where it starts when you evaluate some of the best teams in the country. That's kind of why I'm so high in Oregon. Now you get into a few other talking points. I want to start with culture. And I know this is kind of a buzz term. It's hard to describe. What I think makes this team special is you could have had question marks about Oregon's culture in terms of, hey, we just brought 15, 16 transfer portal additions. A lot of the key players for this Oregon team are transfer portal additions over the last year or two. But the culture continues to be elite. I mean, you watch this Oregon team outside of those first 2 games where I think they were just kind of trying to put it together a little bit, obviously playing some sloppy football. Since that point, when is there a game where Oregon comes out in and just kind of sleepwalks? Yeah, they've had a few sloppy second halves, and I wouldn't even say sloppy, more just kind of, hey, we're shutting it down, trying to get to the next Saturday here healthy. We haven't seen this Oregon team come out to a football game and not be ready to play since week 1 against Idaho. And I think that you can't say that for a lot of other college football programs that we see across the country. We just saw Ohio State play Nebraska, did not play very good football. We've seen Georgia trip up a few times. Game like Kentucky. Kentucky's not a very good team. Georgia goes to the wire with them. Clearly not necessarily ready to go out and play. You can't really say that for Oregon. I think it starts with 2 things. One, Dan Lanning. One of the things that we were most excited about when he took the job in Eugene going back 2.5 years ago, was almost 3 years now, is that Dan Lanning has been under probably the 2 best college football head coaches that we've seen in the last 10, 20 years, Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. And so he's worked under those 2 programs, those 2 leaders, and has kind of been able to bring just bits and pieces of how those 2 coaches run a program and implement it in Oregon. I mean, he's not just purely Kirby Smart. It's not just Nick Saban. It's Dan Lanning's twist on things, but he's witnessed firsthand. He's been a part of it firsthand in terms of how to build some of the best cultures in all of college football. You can tell he's implemented that for this Oregon team. And then you look at the veteran leadership on this roster. Dillon Gabriel, yeah, he's a year one transfer quarterback here, but he's a 6-year senior that clearly has command over this Oregon team from a leadership standpoint. You can say the same thing for like Tez Johnson. You can say the same thing for a guy like Marcus Harper, who nobody's going to talk about. You talk about a guy that is, been with this Oregon team, has been one of the vocal leaders of this Oregon team. He's not necessarily the best player, but he's one of their vocal leaders. You look at Jeff Boss on the defensive side of the football, the combination between one, it starts with the coaching staff and what Dan Lanning has done there. But I think more importantly, it starts with the players in that locker room. There's just guys that you trust from a culture standpoint. Number two, and I think this is starting to be a real differentiator in the landscape of college football in 2024 is quarterback play. Let's just be quite frank. The quarterback play in 2024 has not been very good, right? Quinn Ewers, shaky. A guy like Carson Beck, extremely shaky. Jalen Milroe, been a roller coaster. A lot of the best teams in college football, they have good quarterbacks, but they have quarterbacks that haven't necessarily been consistent. You look at Dillon Gabriel, obviously top 5 in Heisman odds. He's been consistent. But I think even more importantly, Dillon Gabriel, I think, is more talented than maybe even I gave him credit for coming into 2024, where what was the conversation with DG was, hey, he's coming into an Oregon offense that perfectly suits Dillon Gabriel in terms of ball out quick, accurately, on time, kind of what Bo Nix did last year. What separates Dillon Gabriel is you take a look at, all right, 20-plus yards down the field. He's completing 55% of those footballs. He's been elite attacking the deeper third. He's been elite with some of those big-time throws that we probably didn't give him enough credit for being able to hit. Now I want to see them push the ball down the field a little bit more. Only 10% of his dropbacks are pushing at 20-plus yards. He's completing 55% of them for 5 touchdowns, only 1 interception. I want to see Dillon Gabriel do it more. And he has kind of unlocked that, I don't know if you'd say missing piece to his offense, but he can make NFL caliber throws that I don't think enough people in the national media gave him credit to be able to do. Obviously leading the country in completion percentage. At the end of the day, Dillon Gabriel has been one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. That's becoming a separator for a lot of the top teams in the landscape of college football in 2024. Number 3, running game coming on. This is kind of what made Oregon so special last year. Is everybody talked about Bo Nix, but this rushing attack for Oregon last year was also top 10 in the country in terms of yards per carry. Took a little bit to get going, but over the past couple of weeks, you've seen it come on. Jordan James, 37 missed tackles forced, 25 carries of 20-plus yards. This rushing attack is starting to get it going. I would throw Noah Whittington into that mix as well. That game against Illinois, for me at least, and I think for a lot of Oregon fans, you looked at it and said he's back. He's back from the injury. Probably took him a couple games and a couple weeks and maybe the first 2 months. The rushing game's getting going. You look at Illinois, you ran the football for 229 yards. You outrushed Ohio State. What was the storyline coming in for Ohio State this year was how good this rushing attack can be. Oregon, 155 yards against a very good front seven for Ohio State. Outrushed Ohio State in that football game. That's what makes this team so special on offense in general. Right? You have a quarterback that you trust. You have a ton of different pass catchers on the outside, whether it's Tez Johnson, whether it's Evan Stewart, whether it's Trayshawn Holden, whether it's Kenny Sadiq at the tight end position or Terrence Ferguson. You want to try to take away the passing attack. Oregon can run the football. You want to try to take away a passing attack that can attack you in so many different ways, leave your 2 safeties high. This Oregon team can run the football. When you have that multidimensionality with this offense, it makes it so hard to deal with when you factor in all the difference makers that Oregon has with the quarterback that can just distribute. The quarterback can just get it to any place that you want it to go to on the offensive side of the football. We're starting to see this Oregon offense really start to find that peak form, especially in that first half against Illinois. Like that's what you want Oregon playing 4 quarters of football with. If you get that, I don't know if there's many defenses across the country that can deal with it. Now you go to the defensive side of the football. I'm going to go to number 5 because I think this is what makes this Oregon team different, and that is the pass rush. Last year it was good. It wasn't great, especially on the inside. You look at guys like Popo or Casey Rogers, guys that were good football players for Oregon, but weren't necessarily difference makers. Popo, 12 quarterback hurries, a 4% pass rush win rate last year. Casey Rogers, 11 quarterback hurries, and 8% pass rush win rate. Fast forward to where we sit right now, 8 games, 7 games through the 2024 season. Derek Harmon on the inside, 26 quarterback hurries. So he's doubled what Popo and Casey Rogers had to this point. 17% pass rush win rate. Mateo Yu, Tatum Tuioti, they're coming on the outside. You've been doing all of this. You're sacking the quarterback 8.3% of the time, which is 20th in the country. But you don't even have Jordan Burch for the last couple of games. In the biggest game of the season against Ohio State, you hadn't had him. And so what happens when Jordan Burch gets factored in that mix, who was arguably the best defensive lineman, best pass rusher that Oregon had until he suffered that injury? So the pass rush, the difference makers, the ability to create negative plays on defense, that's what's coming on for Oregon. Second, or lastly, I should say, secondary has been elite. You look at Jabbar Muhammad, 38 targets, only 18 catches, a 47% completion percentage when targeted. On the opposite side, Nico Reed has been phenomenal for this Oregon team. Brandon Johnson on the inside has been really good. Heck, even Dante Manning has been a pretty good quarterback for this Oregon Ducks program that nobody really talks about. You're only giving up 5.8 yards per pass. That's number 10 in the country. If there's one thing that I want to see Oregon take that step in, and this is kind of the conversation for Oregon that we've been having all year, really, is how does Oregon go from good to great? How does Oregon go from, they're a college football playoff team. How do they go to that national championship caliber team? Want to see more turnovers. They're only forcing 1.1 turnovers per game outside of the top 60. I think that with how disruptive this pass rush has been with guys like Jabbar Muhammad and Nico Reed on the outside, I think this team can do a better job forcing turnovers. If they do that, like that to me for this defense is kind of that missing piece that really makes them that national championship caliber defense. If they can do that to close out 2024, roll into the college football playoffs with how complete and how talented this roster is, it's really hard to see them losing a lot of football games. And I think most importantly, this team seems to be getting better. Like, you go back to the conversations we had after the Idaho game or after the Boise State game where it just felt like it wasn't coming together. That Ohio State win, I think, was the turning point. You roll with Purdue. You top 20 ranked Illinois team that in the first half didn't even look like they belonged on the same football field for Oregon. That's another factor that is probably worth mentioning is teams, especially at the college football level, like they change from week 1 to week 12. What does that change look like? Do they get better? Do they get worse? That's conversation. This Oregon team's clearly going in the right direction where there's a lot of other teams that, I think notably Ohio State or Georgia, right? Georgia opens up, trounces Clemson. They don't necessarily look like the team we saw week 1 against Clemson. Ohio State, all of a sudden with that loss to Oregon, they suddenly don't look like the team that was rolling through their early portions of the schedule. This Oregon team seems to be getting better. And that's probably the last thing you want to note with this Oregon team. To my opinion, they're the best team in the country. Obviously, the AP polls as well. And they're continuing to get better. That's what excites me the most about this Oregon team. I think clearly the number 1 team in the country. I think clearly can get better as they roll into the college football playoffs. Buckle in, because this Oregon team, it's going to be dangerous over the next couple of weeks and months. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.